Antiquities of the Jews, a preface by Josephus Flavius. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. He was born Jewish royalty, taken prisoner by Vespasian during the war with Rome, and became historian, advisor, and adopted son to the Caesar. Flavius Josephus has been labeled a traitor, an impostor, even a fool by modern critics. I ask the viewer to bear in mind that not only does his life echo the stories of Joseph and Daniel from Old Testament canon, but also to consider that just as Christ spoke all in parable for those with ears to hear, just as Josephus claims Moses was imparting allegorical truth to us, and perhaps this man too had hold of the spiritual keys, and is not, as many claim, a fool, I do believe this work to be his attempt to retell our history, reveal our true nature, impart to us the wisdom with which God speaks to man, hidden in plain sight. Antiquities of the Jews, Preface. Those who undertake to write histories do not, I perceive, take that trouble on one and the same account, but for many reasons, and those such are is very different one from another. For some of them apply themselves to this part of learning to show their skill in composition, that they may therein acquire a reputation for speaking finely. Others there are who write histories in order to gratify those that happen to be concerned in them, and on that account have spared no pains, but rather gone beyond their own abilities in the performance. But others there are who of necessity and by force are driven to write history because they are concerned in the facts, and so cannot excuse themselves from committing them to writing for the advantage of posterity. No, there are not a few who are induced to draw their historical facts out of the darkness into light, and to produce them for the benefit of the public, on account of the great importance of the facts themselves with which they have been concerned. Now, of these several reasons for writing history, I must profess the last two were my own reasons also. For instance, I was myself interested in that war which we Jews had with the Romans, and knew myself its particular actions, and what conclusion it had. I was forced to give the history of it, because I saw that others had perverted the truth of those actions in their writings. Now I have undertaken the present work as thinking it will appear to all Greeks worthy of their study, for it will contain all of our antiquities and the constitution of our government as interpreted out of the Hebrew Scriptures. And indeed I did formerly intend, when I wrote of the war, to explain who the Jews originally were, what fortunes they had been subject to, and by what legislature they had been instructed in piety and the exercise of other virtues. What wars also they had made in remote ages, till they were unwillingly engaged in this last with the Romans. But because this work would take up a great compass, I separated it into a set of treatises by itself, with a beginning of its own and its own conclusion. But in process of time, as usually happens to such as undertake great things, I grew weary and went on slowly, it being a large subject, and a difficult thing to translate our history into a foreign and to us unaccustomed language. However, some persons there were who desired to know our history, and so exhorted me to go on with it, and above all the rest, Epaphroditus, a man who is a lover of all kind of learning, but is principally delighted with the knowledge of history, and this on account of his having been himself concerned in great affairs, and many turns of fortune, and having shown a wonderful rigor of an excellent nature, and an immovable virtuous resolution in them all. I yielded to this man's persuasions, who always excite such as have abilities in what is useful and acceptable, to join their endeavors with his. I was also ashamed myself to permit any laziness of disposition to have any greater influence upon me than the delight of taking pains in such studies as were very useful. I thereupon stirred up myself and went on with my work more cheerfully. Besides the foregoing motives, I had others which I greatly reflected on, and these were, that our forefathers were willing to communicate such things to others, and that some of the Greeks took considerable pains to know the affairs of our nation. I found therefore that the second of the Ptolemies was a king who was extraordinarily diligent in what concerned learning and the collection of books, that he was also peculiarly ambitious to procure a translation of our law and the constitution of our government, therein contained into the Greek tongue. Now Eleazar the high priest, one not inferior to any other of that dignity among us, did not envy the forenamed king the participation of that advantage, which otherwise he would for certain have denied him, but that he knew the custom of our nation was to hinder nothing of what we esteemed ourselves from being communicated to others. Accordingly, I thought it became me both to imitate the generosity of our high priest, and suppose there might be even now many lovers of learning like that king, for he did not obtain all of our writings at that time, but those who were sent to Alexandria as interpreters gave him only the books of law, while there were a vast number of other matters in our sacred books. They indeed contain in them the history of 5,000 years, in which time have been many strange accidents, many chances of war, and great actions of the commanders, and mutations of the form of our government. Upon the whole, a man that will pursue this learn from it that all events succeed well, even to an incredible degree, and that the ward of felicity is proposed by God. But then it is to those that follow his will and do not venture to break his excellent laws, and that so far as men any way apostatize from the accurate observation of what was practical before it becomes impracticable, and whatsoever they set about as a good thing is converted into an incurable calamity. And now I exhort all those that peruse these books to apply their minds to God, and to examine the mind of our legislator, whether he hath not understood his nature in a manner worthy of him, and hath not ever ascribed to him such operations as become his power, and hath not preserved his writings from those indecent fables which others have framed, although by the great distance of time when he lived he might securely have forged such lies, for he lived 2,000 years ago, at which vast distance of ages the poets themselves have not been so hardy as to fix even the generations of their gods, much less the actions of their men or their laws. As I proceed, therefore, I shall accurately describe what is contained in our records in the order of time that belongs to them, for I have already promised to do so throughout this undertaking, and thus without adding anything to what is therein contained, or taking away anything therefrom. But because almost all of our Constitution depends upon the wisdom of Moses, our legislator, I cannot avoid saying something concerning him beforehand, though I shall do it briefly. Because otherwise those that read my book may wonder how it comes to pass that my discourse, which promises an account of laws and historical facts, contains so much of philosophy. The reader is therefore to know that Moses deemed it exceeding necessary that he who would conduct his own life well, and give laws to others, in the first place should consider the divine nature, and upon the contemplation of God's operations should thereby imitate the best of all patterns, so far as it is possible for human nature to do so, and to endeavor to follow after it. Neither could the legislator himself have a right mind without such a contemplation, nor would anything he should write tend to the promotion of virtue in his readers. Unless they be taught first of all that God is the Father and Lord of all things, and sees all things, and that thence he bestows a happy life upon those that follow him, but plunges such as do not walk in the paths of virtue into inevitable miseries. Now when Moses was desirous to teach this lesson to his countrymen, he did not begin the establishment of his laws after the same manner the other legislators did, upon contracts and other rights between one man and another, but by raising their minds upwards to regard God and his creation of the world, and by persuading them that we men are the most excellent of the creatures of God upon earth. Now when once he had brought them to submit to religion, he easily persuaded them to submit in all other things. For as to other legislators, they followed fables, and by their discourses transferred the most reproachful of human vices unto the gods, and afforded wicked men the most plausible excuse for their crimes. But as for our legislator, when he had once demonstrated that God was possessed of perfect virtue, he supposed that men also ought to strive after the participation of it, and that those who did not think so, and so believe, he inflicted the severest punishments. I exhort, therefore, my readers to examine this whole undertaking in that view, for thereby it will appear to them that there is nothing therein disagreeable either to the majesty of God or to his love of mankind, for all things have here a reference to the nature of the universe, while our legislator speaks some things wisely, but enigmatically, and others under a decent allegory, but still explains such things as are required a direct explication plainly and expressly. However, those that have a mind to know the reasons of everything might find here a very curious philosophical theory, which I now indeed shall waive the explication of, but if God afford me time for it, I will set about writing it after I have finished the present work. I shall now betake myself to the history before me, after I have first mentioned what Moses says of the creation of the world, which I find described in the sacred books after the following manner.